My name is Elyse Wild, and you are listening to Women's Lifestyle Magazine, Inspired Voices. All right, everybody, thank you for tuning in. This is Elyse Wild with the Inspired Voices podcast from Women's Lifestyle Magazine. I'm really excited today. We are going to be talking to Ericka Kyd Kane Thomspon, who is a local poet here in Grand Rapids. Hi, welcome back to another episode of Inspired Voices. I hope you're doing well. I hope you are safe and happy and healthy, and I hope that your loved ones are too. On today's podcast, we have a conversation between me and Ericka Kyd Kane Thomspon, who is a local poet and artist here in Grand Rapids. I really enjoy talking with Kyd. We don't really have a specific topic for this podcast. Kyd and I talked a few weeks ago on about what we would want to talk about. About what we want to talk about on the podcast, and we just mined all these different topics. And the way that Kyd put it is that she's constantly in a state of expressing. So whatever is happening in the moment, she's kind of responding to and feeding. And so it was a really wonderful conversation. We end up talking about identity. We end up talking about the arts, her work with the diatribe, what her favorite word is at the moment, and navigating the Grand Rapids community as a queer Black woman, which I really appreciated her gracious insight on that. And I think it's important that as we move through the world right now, that we really take the time to acknowledge that there are people who move through the world that have identities that are completely different from us, and whatever we can do to learn about that, I think helps everybody, and it can be a really humbling experience. So I hope that you enjoy our conversation today. I certainly did. It certainly inspired me to get more into a state of expressing and sit more with how I'm thinking and feeling at the moment, even though it might be uncomfortable given the current pandemic that is still continuing on in our community and our world. But it really gave me the courage to do so. So here we go. I hope you enjoy. All right, everybody, thank you for tuning in. This is Elyse Wild with the Inspired Voices podcast from Women's Lifestyle Magazine. I'm really excited today. We are going to be talking to Ericka Kyd Kane Thomspon, who is a local poet here in Grand Rapids. And Eric and I had an initial, Kyd and I had our initial conversation a couple of weeks ago, and we really mined some topics that I'm looking forward to bringing to you today through our conversation. And also, I had the pleasure of seeing Kyd perform with Ebony Road Players about a year ago, last year's Loving Day, which took place at the Harris Building. And it was a play that depicted the story of the Lovings, and Kyd acted as the narrator. So that was my first time unknowingly kind of seeing Kyd in play in our community. So Kyd, thank you so much for talking with me today. So tell us a little bit about what you do. Tell us about what does the life of a poet look like in Grand Rapids?
First off, thanks for having me. I appreciate you for reaching out to me to be a part of this podcast. Life as a poet. It's kind of weird to talk about it during this pandemic because everything's changed so significantly. But prior to March, being a poet in the community and someone who values building community and building a community where self-expression can be centered is just something that I feel so beautifully passionate about. I work as a teaching artist with the diatribe. I also hosted an open mic at Creston Brewery called Creston Vibes. I was doing that for the last 3 years every Tuesday, where we, like I said, centered our show around authentic self-expression and giving people who maybe identify as musicians or poets or comedians to a platform, but also just giving regular people an opportunity to just talk about their stuff. There's so many things that we have going in our lives that we don't always get to connect on common ground. So something that's beautiful about poetry is that it gives us the opportunity to share our experiences. My journey as a poet has looked kind of unique. I've paired poetry with visual art, installation art. I've been a part of Art Prize. I've had my work at UICA, Site Lab, in different places like that. So just pairing poetry with contemporary art, visual art, photography, and things of that nature, and just kind of like bopping around and having a good time, and just using my voice to hopefully evoke some change in the hearts and minds of people that get the opportunity to hear me share. So.
It's I was thinking after our initial conversation, as someone who's grown up in Grand Rapids, for me, it was really exciting to learn, kind of like what you do, what your daily life looks like, and also how you create a sustainable income for yourself as an artist. The Grand Rapids I grew up in, which I'm sure you also can maybe identify with this, like did not seem like a place where the arts were something that someone could make at the baseline any sort of income from, and beyond the baseline, also kind of really fulfill a role that they felt was fulfilling for them in the community. Like you can carve out your spot and also sustain yourself. So that's kind of cool to see, and I'm sure in its current state, I'm sure it's not like always ideal, but it's exciting that people like you are working on it to make sure that others can come after you and do the same thing and find fulfilling life as an artist with an income in Grand Rapids, which again, like 10 or 15 years ago, it just doesn't even seem like it would have been possible.
I don't know that it's something that's extremely easy. I definitely, I guess, put my personal desires over monetary gain. Sometimes it's like, if I can just vibrate through this life authentically and have a good time doing things that I love, then maybe I just don't have as much money as I would like. But I've definitely tried to be creative in the ways in which I've generated income as an artist. I would love to, I don't think that Grand Rapids is any different from 15 years ago. I would certainly love a community that did a better job of valuing artists and making sure that artists were compensated for the things that they were asked to do. So, working alongside other artists and kind of having those tough conversations about how we can get people to value us enough to make sure that we're paid. A lot of times as a poet, people want to pay the photographer, they want to pay the DJ, they want to pay, the caterer, and then they get down to the talent portion of things, where they want to kind of create like this cool little nuanced experience, but then they don't want to pay. They don't want to pay you for your time. So it does get difficult navigating through this city as an artist, especially as it pertains to the financial portion of things. But like I said, I've been very creative in the ways in which I've shared my art. Merch is something that I really tapped into, having actual physical takeaways of my poetry that doesn't come from books. So t-shirts and, just enamel pins and just random things that I can if I go to an event and I share my work, I also have the opportunity for people to buy things from me. And that's one of the ways that I've made myself sustainable. Also working as an artist with the Diatribe, the executive director of the Diatribe, Fable Price, is somebody who really committed to getting artists paid, and that's something that I am grateful for. I wish that more organizations worked as hard as he does to make sure that we're compensated fairly.
That's awesome. So speaking of your work with the Diatribe, I want to talk about your journey to becoming a full-time poet, which for those who don't know, the Diatribe works with and Kyd, correct me if I get any of this wrong, but works with like school-age kids on spoken word expression and gives them avenues to not only create their own spoken word, but perform it too in different areas of the city. I've been to a couple fundraisers where the kids from the Diatribe are like the main act, which is super cool to see kids that age, school age, like express things through poetry that you're like, I think otherwise as adults, we might not even think they're aware of the things that they're expressing, and they're expressing these things in really beautiful ways.
Absolutely. It's a very beautiful experience to be able to work with students with the intention of getting them to be able to like open up and express themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's poetry centered, but I guess any time that I go into any space is really just about authentically being able to express yourself, getting yourself comfortable enough to just say, hey, this is how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's at the forefront of any kind of teaching or any kind of like engagement that I have with people young or old.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, how can you feel comfortable enough to say how you feel, and to say how you feel from a place that's safe, that makes you feel safe.
Yeah, because even that, like, as you're saying like getting to a place where you can say how you feel, like my body's feeling a little bit of anxiety, because sometimes it's like, is how I feel for other people, and it's like, it is, and it's an okay thing to express. But I think, often, and maybe it comes from my identity as being a woman, maybe it comes from growing up in West Michigan, but there's always like interactions for me are not necessarily, it doesn't matter how I feel. Like, how I feel is not going to be central to those. It's about something else. It's about a transaction. It's about being nice. It's about being palatable. So that's a really powerful thing to give people, is the ability to say what they feel. Like, it sounds like this benign thing, but it's really big. It's a huge thing.
I mean, and it also could be this thing that is shared with other people, but it's like, even if you don't have a desire to share with other people, how comfortable are you considering your feelings on your own, in your own space, in your own time? And the level of consideration that you can start to build for yourself will trickle down into the ways that you're able to consider other people. When you're thinking about self-expression, it's just like, if you don't value yourself enough to hear yourself, do you value the people that are in the world with you?
Yeah.
And so those are just things that I consider when working with people on, I don't want to say working with them, but just like being in a space where we're talking about ourselves and where we're expressing ourselves.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So tell us how you got into poetry. When we initially talked, you mentioned that it was something that you were passionate about, like as a child, kind of got not off track, but and then revisited that passion in adulthood, and now here you are. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, as a young person, I went to Grand Rapids Public School, Southeast Academic Center. In the second grade, we had a poetry festival where you could like go out into the field with your family and have like a picnic, and then we would just like share poems that we'd found in books, or some people have created their own poems. But I didn't participate in that first year, but I was there and I was present, and I was so enthralled by everything that I saw. And I think it was that day that I kind of fell in love with words and the potential of things or the possibility of things that I can find inside of a book. I was raised in a home where I was taken care of, but I was also kind of white noise. So I spent a lot of time alone. I spent a lot of time reading, and then I, would get books from the library, and I stumbled across poetry, and I found a way to express myself through poetry and through short stories. And I kind of, one of the things that I really value in this life is like intention setting, or like thoughts becoming things. Mm-hmm. And as a small child, when there was things that I didn't have access to, I would create these stories so that I could have these things. And I like live vicariously through the stories that I created, and also through the stories that I read. It was something that really, I know words are still and were my best friend as a child. Something that just definitely kept me alive, and continues to keep me alive as an adult. I guess as time moved on in my life, I just kind of got bogged down by the weight of the world, and kind of lost touch with the passion of writing and poetry, and even reading, something that I love to do so much, just because work and bills and the trial and error of being a young adult and trying to navigate the world. I was working for a mortgage company where I was working 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. And at some point I ended up getting laid off and getting a severance package that gave me the ability to just kind of like have free mental space for a little while. And while I was working to find another job, I remembered how important reading, writing, poetry was to me. And at that point, I started traveling around, going to local open mics as well as open mics all over the entire country. And while I was at those open mics, I felt this like intense energy arise in me, and I was like, all right, so I'm gonna be writing again. I shared in different places throughout the country before I ever shared poetry here in Grand Rapids. I put out a poetry video in February of 2015. I was like my debut to the world of like my expression and my words, a video called Awaken that I wrote about race and what it's like to be a Black person, and like a call to action for us to kind of wake up and kind of look at things from a different vantage point. And I think I got my first $20 at an event where someone didn't show up, and I was like, dang, someone can pay me to be me. And I kind of got obsessed with the possibility of that. So I really just started spreading myself around, connecting with other artists. And I think where it kind of picked up is like I started doing some work at UICA. They had me come and share poetry at events, and I was like really, really excited to be in a space where UICA just looked really fancy to me after like coming from the open mic sectors. So going there and being able to share at events, and then I, just very organically just started getting different gigs and getting asked to speak at different engagements, and the rest is just history. It's been a really beautiful journey for me.
Wow. Thanks for sharing all that. That's really rad. I think a lot of people can identify with, being so in love with something in childhood or even as young adults, and then losing it because of, for lack of a better word, the rat race of how, as an adult, it can be really easy for us to structure our lives around survival and meeting our basic needs, and just forget about those things that fulfill us. And I don't know, that's really cool. Like, it just sounds like kind of the stars aligned to create who you are now and what you do in the community.
Absolutely. It's definitely been this beautiful blossoming of like art and just like creative expression. I am born and bred to be here to express myself authentically. And like I said, I do that with lots of different mediums, even outside of poetry. Photography is something that I'm really passionate about. I got my hands into some installation, video art as I worked with organizations like Site Lab and UICA. And so it's just been really beautiful to explore all the ways in which we have the capacity to express.
Mm-hmm. So part of our conversation a couple of weeks ago that I've really been carrying with me and has really been part of just my daily thought process is our conversation about identity. And, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about your identity, which is intersectional, but also one of the things that I want to talk about later on, but introduce right now to the listeners is the fact that we all have identity. And sometimes we tend to talk about identity as if it's something that only certain marginalized groups have, but we all have an identity. We all do. And whether we're aware of it or not, it impacts how we move through the world. And so I'm going to let you take it from here, but that's just something that really has had a big impact on me over the past couple of weeks since we last talked.
I'm not really sure. I definitely know that we had a very fruitful conversation a couple of weeks ago. I'm always in a zone of expression, so some things stand out to people that don't necessarily stand out to me. But my identity as a Black first queer woman is that I am constantly in a space where I have to consider everything. Mm-hmm. It's not always this. It's not a situation where it is easy for some women just get to be women.
But I do like what you just said about some women just get to be women because there are spaces to just plug in and start living your life because that's your, you know what I mean? And where people who have more intersectional identities or are more marginalized, like there's not really a place to plug in, or those places to plug in are like more fewer and far between.
Yeah, I know. Definitely in my experiences, uh, in my uh, in my Black spaces, I'm just queer, and that's enough for me to like not necessarily be considered, not necessarily be valued or have my voice heard. That's something, regardless of the beautiful things that I have the capacity to bring to the table. It may I may not even have the option at all, just because I'm queer. And
Yeah.
then, of course, in spaces that that I'm normally in, that are normally predominantly white, because I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, I am Black and queer, and that's I have to navigate Black, queer, and a woman in those spaces. I have to um, I'll even add more Black queer woman who's also relatively poor, and so you go into these rooms, and you have a desire for a seat at the table, and then you realize you don't have enough money, or you realize that you're too Black, or you realize that you're too queer, or you realize that you're a woman, and women are as a whole just valued less. Their voices are heard significantly less. And so if you just keep packing on all of the intersectional parts of my identity, it's just like I've had to work really hard to find space and place. And I'm also in a space now where it's just like I'm not interested in compromising any parts of my identity. So it's like, if you have a problem with any parts of me, then you don't deserve me. You don't deserve for my presence to even be here. I know that I'm moving through the world with a very peaceful, loving energy. And the fact that that is not something that can be valued and seen first in 2020 is just kind of disheartening. But that just means that it's work for me and people like me to do in order to create space, and that's where the community comes in when they're asking questions about how they can help. It's like, are you willing to take a step back? Are you willing to relinquish dollars, relinquish space? Are you willing to say, I've had enough time? I have had a long enough reign, and I'd like for you to be able to be valued enough to just create whatever it is that you need to create, and take up space for people that have an intersectional identity like yours. That's what I'm waiting for the community to do for me, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot. I mean, nowadays there's a lot of talk about the term, to use the term that you just use, like creating space and and using privilege to create space. But I don't know if people like know what it means, or know what it means to follow through on that. And I really like all the things that you just named, of just being, asking yourself some serious questions of like, have I had enough time? Like, what can I, if I'm hosting an event, like who can I bring into this event? And making choices, and making choices, asking yourself questions that prompt you to make choices, as opposed to just rolling through.
That's also something. It's like not who can I bring to this event? Who can I bring to the planning of this event? How can I get people at the forefront of the creation to make sure that that the space that is creating is equitable, and that it considers more people. That's something that makes navigating this community as an artist difficult for me. Is because I have so many different pieces of my identity, I have a higher chance of being tokenized, of people who are trying to talk about queer issues, and they need somebody that's Black and queer. It's like I might be zeroed in on, because I am very open and I am very out about my identity as a Black queer person. Also, just people who want to fill in their diversity, check their diversity box, and just like, oh, we didn't consider anybody Black before this, but we know that this artist is working, and if we have them here and we mention them, or their picture is present, it makes us look better. And so it's just like that makes being an artist very, very difficult. It's like, how can I navigate through this community and know that I'm actually being valued, and not just being used to check a box?
Yeah, I'm sure that's really even more difficult too when there's dollars involved. When when you have to consider, okay, is this gonna be part of my income, but also like, is this good thing gonna devalue me? That's gonna be really hard.
as a younger, as in the beginning of my career, I was just like extremely anxious to do work, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
And then something that I guess artists may get a lot of flack about from people who work regular jobs. They're just like, yeah, you worked with this organization and, you know, they don't really care about queer people. They don't really care about Black people. And you sold yourself out. That's kind of like can be a potential sentiment of a lot of people. And then I have to say, well, you work a 9 to 5 for a company that also doesn't value people. And so we're both walking a thin line of trying to make sure that we're not compromising ourselves.
Yeah.
But it is certainly easier for a person to look at me as an individual and say, all right, you work with this like shady organization that I maybe didn't know they were shady. I don't always know the ins and outs of every group or every organization. And as a young person that, like I said, is also, you know, I come from a place where I am literally just trying to survive. When dollars are on the table, it's like, I wasn't thinking to do the work to like really survey some of the opportunities that were placed on the table for me. I was really just looking at it from a place of dollars and cents. It's like, I can go here for an hour and make more than I made in a week. So it's like, you know, thinking about that and really now at this point, recognizing that there's no amount of money worth me compromising myself and just kind of being a little bit more intentional about the places and spaces and the places and spaces in which I share myself.
It's you know, and right now I think we're at a moment in time in our community and also in a broader sense where you know, a lot of organizations and companies seem to be trying to align very quickly with the right side of history. And I don't know, I guess I don't really have a question attached to that, but it's just like, it just seems more now than ever. It seems like it would be a little bit of a minefield to navigate like, okay, so you sent out a statement saying that you support this and that, but do you?
Yeah.
Let's look at that. And also like, okay, so that, it's gotta be difficult, but as you said, you know, it's really important too.
The statement is the easy part. It's
the
statement is the easy part. And I know that's been some of my criticism. I haven't really said much about anything that's really happening in the world right now because I just feel like it's cyclical and it just continues to happen. And I'm always trying to figure out ways in which things can shift, but it has to shift for me as an individual and not as it's like a grand scheme of things. I hope that the things that I do in this life trickle down and have the potential or capacity to affect others. And I don't know if it's something that I can do with just like a statement or a post. But I know that a lot of organizations have done that where they're just like putting BLM on their building or, you know, all of these little things. And it's just like, the most important thing that can happen for me is that all of the people who work at these places that are coming out and saying that they support us, that they're actually challenging their privileges, they're actually challenging the people in their lives that they're sitting down and having dinner with. There's so many people who are just so willing to run to Black people or to other people of color and ask them questions about things that they can do. And it's like, realistically, you should be working on unpacking your identity and finding out the ways in which you're affecting people adversely. And also looking at your family members that you are visiting for holidays and finding out why it's so important for them to have such negative views about people that are different from them and how harmful those things are in all different sectors. If your gas station attendant is racist, if your dentist is racist, if your teacher is racist, these are the family members of white people who are maybe well-intended, but if you aren't checking and challenging them, then you're really not doing the work. If you're not checking yourself, you're really not doing the work. I don't really care if you say Black Lives Matter, show me.
Which is like, and you know, the showing part, like that takes time, and that's work, and that's an investment, and it's I don't know, you just put it so succinctly and perfectly that the statement is the easy part. So I want to talk a little bit about how coronavirus has kind of changed your life as a poet and what that looks like. I mean, you mentioned you had spent 3 years hosting what sounds like a really amazing open mic night at Crescent Brewery. And now all those spaces that we used to come together and have these shared experiences, it's all gone.
Yeah, COVID-19 really just, I mean, I'm not the only person. It really crushed a lot of people's lives and really stopped people dead in their tracks.
Yeah.
You know, I was, like I said, I was hosting that show, doing some teaching with the diatribe, doing event photography, um, also, you know, just lots of creative things that require us to be in large spaces. So now that we, you know, when events got canceled and when schools were closed, literally my life has come to a screeching halt. And so, you know, at first my intention was like, okay, now I have this like free time. I'm gonna go so hard and I'm gonna create so much content and everything's gonna happen.
Yeah.
It just didn't happen that way.
Yeah, I think so many people are feeling that way of just like, now's my opportunity to find my passion again. And then, you know, I know I myself, I was like, I'm finally going to read Moby Dick. I've never read it. And then I'm like, and I couldn't, like, my brain would not, like, you know, because of course there's all this anxiety surrounding that, but go on. So yeah, keep going.
Yeah, no, so I was like, you know, thinking I was going to be this like creative content monster. And then you realize that when life kind of slows down, it allows you to maybe see yourself a little bit more clearly. Self-awareness is something that has increased for me significantly. And so a lot of times being a person that's fairly public and a person that people know me, they're always kind of like, what's next? What'd you do? And I'm like, I took care of myself and I loved all over myself, and I haven't done it perfectly, and it's been a tough job. But like I talked a lot about maybe a little bit before we started our last conversation, just about that internal fitness, that the work that you do on self, unpacking some of the trauma and like looking at some of those fracture points. And I think that will bring it will be so beneficial to me when things kind of level out for the world, is that I've actually done the work on myself to maybe heal some things that was causing me trouble in the past, or like making things more difficult for me to do. And so I'm excited about how I'll be able to create content and how I'll be able to express as time passes, based on the amount of free time that I've had in quarantine. I spend a lot of time outdoors. My relationship with nature has increased significantly, from bike riding to trails to just, you know, playing in the mud. And I really got to get down to the kid in me, the little person inside of me that maybe didn't get all the things that she needed, doing a lot of reparenting. And like, there's nothing more beautiful and creative than self-work. Getting so creative with the self-work. And I know that will pour into the way that I get to express myself, the way that I get to connect with young people and adults alike. And so, you know, coronavirus and COVID did stop a lot of things, and it's taught me what's really essential. Self.
Oh yeah, I'm glad to hear that, like, you're experiencing, I mean, it has stopped the world for so many of us, and it's been really hard. I mean, at the beginning, I still am not used to it. I still have days where my anxiety is really high, but you know, I just don't know if I'd ever be digging into myself as much as I have been had this not happened. You know, and I'm excited to see what you create in the future, like as you're armed with all this new like self work that you've done. That's really exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's been scary. It's been hard. And I don't think that anybody's outside of that. Everybody is looking at themselves a little bit differently, looking at the world a lot differently. And it's all about a new energy that is present on the planet. And it's our responsibility to use it for change. And the change should start with us as individuals, for sure.
So Kyd, I have one last question for you. This is kind of a surprise question. I just thought of it as we were talking. What's your favorite word right now? Do you have one?
Let me think about it for a second.
Yeah, you can take your time.
Favorite word. Self. I think that's it. We just like trickle right from that. It's like when you're thinking about yourself, and you can see yourself clearly, it puts you in a position to see other people more clearly. When you're in a space where you can acknowledge the way that you feel as an individual, you can also kind of look into your home and look at how everyone else is feeling as individuals. And when you can look at your house, you can look outside your house and you can see your neighbors. And when you can see your neighbors, you can look outside your neighbors and see your community. And it just keeps going further and further and further out, right? You put yourself in a position to see you, and then you see others. And then at that point, you can kind of start popping some of those bubbles of privilege, putting yourself in a position to care for the world more intentionally and more intently. And it always starts here. It always starts with the heart that resides in each and every one of us. We work on ourselves, and the love that we have from ourselves starts to ruminate, which is also one of my favorite words, starts to ruminate, and then people around you can experience that and feel that and maybe start to love themselves more intently. And I think that's where change happens, starting here. So.
That was a really beautiful answer. Thank you.
Thanks.
So where can people keep up with you? Where can they buy your merch? Tell us where we can find you online.
You can find me online, Kyd Kane Poetry on Instagram, Facebook. Also kydsaidit.com, under construction, but you'll be able to buy merch there soon. You can also, find out what I'm doing along with the diatribe, and, find us on Facebook, find us on Instagram, see the things that we're doing in the community. Or you just, might see me on the nature trail.
Yeah. And thanks for taking the time to talk to me. I really appreciate it. And I hope everyone listening got, enjoyed our conversation and got as much out of it as I did.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. Peace and love.
All right. To stay in touch with us, please visit www.womenslifestyle.com and sign up for our newsletter. You can also listen to this podcast on YouTube. Our YouTube channel is Women's Lifestyle, all one word. If you have any ideas for a podcast episode, or if you'd like to hear from someone we haven't interviewed yet, please reach out to me at ELYSE@womenslifestyle.com. That's Elyse at womenslifestyle.com.